We will go to item number 19, override of Mayor Hayward's veto to ordinances 26-14 and 27-14 matters.
I'm making a motion. Excuse me. I make a motion that council override the mayor's veto of ordinances 26-14 and 27-14. And if I get a second, I would like to speak to the motion.
Okay, I got a motion. I got a second. Since you sponsored the item, Ms. Myers.
Okay. These two ordinances passed unanimously by the council. Now, what these ordinances do is it requires that the purchase of legal services be in writing, or that there be some evidence of a contractual agreement as to what the services are that we're purchasing. So they also require that there be a central location of records having to do with attorney fees. And the last thing that it requires is that when services exceed $25,000 in 1 year, that it is reported to council. Now, I will tell you that one thing I've learned throughout this 4-year process of trying to get contracts to see contracts that evidence what we're paying attorneys for. At first, I thought the city was just being difficult and not responding to my open record request. What I really found out is that the records weren't there, that we could not produce contracts and agreements for a lot of legal fees that we're paying for. I got a list of 56 vendors, and I know how much we've been paying for legal fees. But the problem is that a lot of these services are not evidenced by any kind of an agreement. We have an agreement with one law firm that we've been doing business with for 30 years and don't have a contract with. And we've been doing that because they give us a good fee. I mean, this is not the way you do business. This is about transparency and accountability in government. I mean, and so all I'm asking is that when we purchase legal services, that it be evidenced by some sort of document, either a letter or a contract. And I will also like to point out another reason why we need this is under the Florida statute 119, there is a new provision that requires that all contracts with vendors have in those contracts that the vendor's records are open records, are governed by Florida open record laws. That's required language now in contracts with all vendors. So I've been working with Attorney Rusty Wells on this. He's done a lot of research trying to find contracts. We've had he can tell you what he's done, but it's my understanding that not just with legal services are we having a difficult time finding contracts and agreements, but at least we can start with legal services. At the very least, we can start with legal services. Attorneys are required to conform to a very high level of ethical conduct. And I think, that any attorney should want to have things in writing. And we certainly need to have them in writing, and we need to let them know. Number one, we need to know that they have malpractice insurance. That's another reason it needs to be in writing and probably reiterated. And also the open records requirements.
Okay, thank you. We have Councilmember Baer. Councilmember Baer.
Thank you, Madam President. First thing I want to do is read a statement from Mayor Ashton Hayward that everyone got yesterday at 6:21. And it says, and this is relating to the federal inquiry, as mayor, I have worked to promote a culture of openness and transparency at City Hall. Okay, openness and transparency. That is what these two ordinances are trying to do. First of all, they form a central repository for legal agreements, and they make it so the city attorney is actually the custodian of those. In addition, the $25,000 amount is a reasonable amount. If we're spending more than that on legal services, I believe everyone needs to know. The interesting thing is that I'd like to know who is representing everyone in this federal case. I found it out through a blog that it's actually Beggs and Lane, that our city attorney is not even involved in that, and that's something I had to find out through another source. I don't see this as any type of infringement on the ability of the city attorney or the chief financial officer to do their jobs. The statement that was given to us in the veto record was that both the city attorney and chief financial officer, who is now our acting city administrator, have advised me that ordinances 2614 and 2714, if enacted, would create significant administrative and logistics issues for the finance and legal departments, as well as for any state department which utilizes legal services. Oh, I'm sorry, this is a sunshine state where we abide by sunshine, public records, we have to make everything available. And if we don't know, as the governing body, who's representing us legally, we've got a real problem. The fact that we got a subpoena here that went to our records custodian that we weren't made aware of before the press, that is outrageous. These two ordinances, we need to override this veto. We need to send a message that we are for openness and transparency, regardless of what the mayor is telling us on these two ordinances. Thank you.
Mr. Wingate? You want to talk? Mr. Wells, do you have any comment?
Well, I've sent council a good deal of material in the last few days. Let me set the context of this just for a minute, if I may. Having been in Mr. Messer's chair in the past and having been an assistant for many years before that, by way of background, when I first saw this issue in the news, in the press, about city has no records of lawyers and lots of money is being spent, I knew that wasn't true. I just knew that wasn't true because I've done my turn in the barrel in the past. But I knew that it was difficult to find these records because they're not centrally located. The request for veto didn't come from the mayor. It came to the mayor, basically from Mr. Barker. This is one of those issues, I think, that President Canada Wynne has described. This is an example of it, of the kind of procedures that you have where an ordinance was proposed, fairly quickly voted on, implemented on 2 readings, and the city staff finally had a chance to assess it and digest it and say, holy mackerel, this is going to be a burden for us. There wasn't an opportunity for the staff to say, as in the old days, I'll just say, to say, what's your opinion before we vote on it the first time around? And the truth is, as Ms. Myers says, there are many kinds of records. If you look for contracts, if you look for real estate leases, if you look for licenses to use rights-of-way, all kinds of city records are not centrally located. When the city some years ago went to its electronic filing system of Fortis, the categorization of things, the central location of things got lost. And unless you know how to search Fortis and your computer skills are pretty good, it's difficult to find all this stuff. But when you come down to the kinds of things that Councilman Myers is looking for, contracts with lawyers, ask yourself this. If you have a family doctor that you've used for many years, you've spent a lot of money on, here's where the contract is. When you first walked in the door, you gave him a driver's license and an insurance card. That's the contract. You didn't ask, what are you going to charge? You never ask, what are you going to charge? If he sends you to an expert, if he sends you to a hospital, you never ask, what are you going to charge? They couldn't tell you when you walk in the door what's wrong with you and what it's going to cost to fix you. Professional contracts really don't work that way all the time. And so what the city does with the law firm that Ms. Myers described, It's a local firm, a block away, has for many, many years, 20, 30 years, represented us because we're self-insured for vehicular accidents. Police cars back over a mailbox or something. That happens a lot. They defend those claims, those injury and damage claims. They do it very inexpensively, and they're very good at it. And so the contract with them today is the risk management office sends them a file, sends them a damage claim, and says, handle it. And that's the way most lawyers who have established relationships with corporate clients or individual clients, I don't know how many of you might have a family lawyer, but you don't call up and say, let's do a contract for this thing that I'm sending you today. It's different from what we discussed in your office last week. It just doesn't happen that way. If you look for those kind of contracts, you're not going to find them. The Florida Bar basically sets the contract terms for you. They can't. What are you going to pay? You can't pay more than you don't have to pay more than a reasonable charge. And there's a process if there's a dispute for figuring that out. There are many contracts in the city that are written. Everything I've ever done for the city, both before I came to work as an employee and then since then, has been with a written contract. But it doesn't always happen if you have an established ongoing relationship. Many of the things that the city uses lawyers for, an insurance company hires them, because we have insurance for lots of things that we do, police liability and other kind of professional employee officers and executive liability. Employment defense claims. The firm that represents us a lot in that area, they're powered by the insurance company. And so we don't have a contract with them for those kinds of things, but we pay them lots of money, and I hope we're satisfied with the services. But what I've done in the last week, that Ms. Myers referenced the lot of work, and I thank you for that acknowledgement. I looked at the city's practices going back to 2005 through 2013, and I sent each of you a memo summarizing the flow of legal work over time, trying to reference who actually was doing it, what they do, and attaching all of the records of what they got paid for year after year after year. The other issue that complements this is that Mr. Barker, his staff have worked hard at putting together several additional slides on his quarterly financial report that's coming to you, I guess tonight. And it covers year to date. Who are the lawyers? What do they get? And I've already told you what they do year after year. And so together we're hoping, Mr. Barker and I are hoping that the mountain of information that you now have electronically and you're going to keep getting quarter after quarter about lawyers, who they are, what they do, is going to satisfy the transparency issue that y'all are properly concerned about. And anybody that has any question about any of the details, the central location for this is really the finance department, Mr. Barker's office. That's where all of the rubber hits the road, where the bills come in and the bills get paid. And so if you look for contracts, you're probably not going to find everything you expect to find, because we have long-standing relationships with these attorneys, and we don't have correspondence. We just send them a file. Here's a new case. Here's a new EEO charge. Here's a new car wreck. Here's a file. So I know I'm long-winded, but you're talking about my profession, and I apologize for the length of it.
Okay. Mr. Barker, then Dr. Pratt, and then Ms. Myers.
Yes, Madam President, I would just like to say that I've sat out in the audience and I'm on the podium now, and I've heard these comments about transparency. The fact of the matter, in the exit conference that the council hired new auditors for this city, with yourself and the auditors and me, the comment was made that we're the most transparent city that our auditors have worked for. Now, he made that comment in the exit conference with the council president. We have done as much as we've been asked to do starting with some reports that Councilwoman Pratt wanted when we first started out and changing, and putting that on our web so that the public can get that information. So it concerns me that the perception is that this city is not transparent. My understanding of where this particular issue came from, Madam President, is that there was not available information concerning what we're spending on our outside attorneys. And without input of staff, without staff being asked, an ordinance was produced, which council can do. The council can do that. But I have the right as the CFO to ask the mayor to veto an ordinance if I think it's something that should have had staff input to start with. And that's where this came from in conversations with Mr. and myself. Now, I think you'll find that I'm one of the most transparent people. I want to get information out to the public. I do not mind doing that. Our staff has went to extra efforts to do that. And so what we have done in the report and in the veto memo that the mayor had sent is that we have put together a slide of the expenses, over $25,000, and those are available. And I would ask that the council work with that, and if it's not giving enough information, that they allow staff to have an input on what they would like to accomplish. And you don't have to go by our input, but, you know, I've been doing this a long time, so that doesn't mean it's right. It just means I've been doing it a long time. But I think I have some knowledge of helping council get where they want to get. We work very well in the budget process together and have for many years with this council. And I would just appreciate on any ordinance, not just finance related, when I'm directed to do something by the city council in an ordinance, that I'd be given the opportunity to give input before those things are done. And I think we work together as a staff with the city council in doing those things. And instead of just having an ordinance prepared without any input, what it does is, you know, it may develop into a veto like this one did, and then there's a misunderstanding of why the veto was given, but staff was never asked up front comments. And there again, we don't have to be, but then, you know, I have the right to ask the mayor to veto it, and that's what happened in this situation. So I hope we can continue to work together. We do very well in the budget, and I would just ask council when they do come up with ordinances, if they would ask for staff input. We do have some expertise, and you can use them or not use them, but I think it would work better if you had those expertise. In the old form of government, it worked very well to have staff input on the ordinance. So those are my comments, Madam President, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pratt.
Thank you, Madam President. If we recall back to when we voted on this, I started off by speaking against these ordinances. I find that, you know, sometimes the level of bureaucracy that we try and impose, especially from our seats when we're not sitting there day to day knowing what's going on, can be cumbersome. And I was very concerned about that. Then as the conversation flowed, there were a couple of points that switched my vote. One were some comments by City Administrator Castile, and another was in the comment that, well, we never know how much it's going to cost. We never know. And I thought, well, I hope we know it doesn't cost $1 million or $20 million or $500 million, because we can't pay that much. So there's got to be some knowledge of what it costs. Mr. Wells mentioned you wouldn't ask your doctor. Well, that's sort of the problem with our healthcare system now. You know, I have an HSA, which means that I pay for it, you know, and I do ask. I say, do I need this test? Why am I having this test? do you really think my child has lead poisoning when I've lived in a brand-new house? I don't think I need to pay whatever, $50 or whatever. You ask those questions, and I think that I was very concerned to hear that we don't care what the price is. That didn't, and I know that they do care. And I think that there's an effort to improve the transparency on these legal things, but I think that it might be valuable to consider a policy saying, get them to give you a written, the attorneys cost this much per hour, the legal aids cost this much per hour kind of report, because I think that we have a fiscal responsibility beyond any interest of transparency. And then on the transparency issue, Mr. Barker mentioned how the staff would like to have input. I would love to have staff input on everything. Mr. Kobe and I used to talk every council meeting beforehand, and we would go through the agenda, and I'd say, okay, what's the backstory on this? What's the backstory on that? We've had Dr. Cox for a while, but she didn't know the backstory. She didn't know how this whatever thing is going to affect the city. And I welcome staff input. I would love to get a call. As Mr. Barker knows, we have some rules about whether we can call them. But my phone number is public record. It's in the phone book. You can Google me. You can do anything. You can find me. I am infinitely findable. And so I think that this really ultimately raises that point for us. It's not a transparency issue in terms of auditors. It's a communication issue. We're not getting the information we need to make informed decisions. And I hope that Mr. Barker knows what that kind of communication should be, and I hope that as this government goes forward, that becomes the norm, that the council comes, I want an ordinance that does this. And Mr. Barker would read the agenda before the meeting and say, oh, Megan, there's some issues, and call all of the rest of you and say, here are some concerns, and I hope you'll make an informed vote. Yeah, we don't have to listen to him, but I think that the communication is the important part, and I think, I'm not thinking this is going to pass tonight, but I do hope that there's the other little element of fiscal oversight that while they want to give us the after report, I think an annual letter from the agencies that we use with their estimated costs per hour would be helpful. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Councilmember Meyer. She's had her hand up. And then Councilmember Baer. Mr. Barker, did you want to add something? Go ahead.
Yes, Madam President. If I could, there was a couple of comments that Councilwoman Pratt made. And so no matter what was said in the past, these are my comments. And the comments are this. I do care what something costs. The city employees care, who are dealing with legal services, what something costs. We do see on the billing the legal aids and those type of things that you've said. They are there and they are reviewed for the cost. So there is, it's not just open checkbook. And the attorneys that I've worked with outside the city have realized that during the years as we work through that. So, and I appreciate your comments because we have worked together in the past on things as we move through. And I think by bringing Mr. Wells on and Ms. Fountain, working with him and myself currently in my interim position, that if there's information that council needs, I'll make the commitment that information will get to council so that they can make informed decisions. And I appreciate you saying that, and I think you understand it works both ways. And the both ways is, somehow maybe we have to change a little bit of how things are done, that if council has an idea about an ordinance, just throwing it on the agenda probably is not the best way to do that. Maybe throw it on there and then send it back to staff, see if staff has any comments, and then come back. May be the best way to do that, but that has to yet be worked out. But on this particular issue, there's not an open checkbook, and I think most attorneys that work with the city know that. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councilmember Myers and Councilmember Bear. However, Councilmember Johnson has not spoke to this issue, and so he will speak.
Yes.
And then I'll come back.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to clarify one thing. This takes a supermajority to override a mayor's veto. Is that correct, Madam President? Or maybe I could have someone answer that question. Supermajority?
I believe so. It takes a supermajority.
6 votes.
6 votes.
So this would take 6 votes to override. Okay. And I appreciate Mr. Barker's comments. I really appreciate the work staff does. I think we have a good staff here. Many times they get beat down, but I do appreciate the job staff does. I will not be supporting this tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Wu, he has not spoken to this issue.
Thank you, Madam President. If it takes 6 votes, then I don't think that it probably will overturn the veto, so the political expedient thing is not to say anything. But I feel compelled. The dilemma I have is I'm an elected official. I have people ask me questions. And I may have it wrong, but I can't imagine dropping my car off and saying, do me whatever you want. And we're hearing that we're going to get information. Well, if we're going to get information, then what is the difference between that and passing what we're talking about? Because what we're going to pass is basically information we're going to get. I'd be wrong because I'm not an attorney. Yeah. But from what I understand, we receive a bill and we pay it. And some of those bills are, I believe, $200,000 to $500,000. And if somebody says, what is this $200,000 to $500,000? Are we able to tell them? And the next question that comes is, why do we even have to go through this to get that information? Why have we never been provided this information before? Why do we have to hear about even doing an ordinance? Are we not the governing body of the city? It is better to be quiet at times. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilman Myers, Councilman... Okay.
He hasn't spoken yet.
Yeah,
Okay, Councilman...
I just wonder what the city attorney, what his opinion is. I mean, I think he is a big player in this. Mr. Messer, do you have any comments for the audience?
Mr. Wingate, Mr. Messer.
Council President, Council Wingate, I walk a thin line here because I don't want to advocate a position, but I think factually I could say a few things without risking being thought of as an advocate. So from a purely legal point of view, the Florida Bar doesn't require a contract, and that may be the simple answer to why there are no contracts in some situations. It's not a legal requirement. The second point I would make is I think when we talk about administrative burden, and I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, I don't think we're talking about a paper burden. I think we're talking about a situation where outside attorneys would become fearful that the inquiry into what they do wouldn't stop at billing, but would then go into what would amount to a discovery process to find out exactly what they were doing, require them to come in and explain why they did what they did, and those are all traditionally aspects of the practice of law that aren't explained to the client. You know, the client says, this is the result I want, and with the exception of some rare instances that are client decisions, the attorney just goes out and does it. And you say, well, what happens if the client doesn't like what the attorney does? Well, the client fires the attorney. But I think that fear would be present, and that would inhibit the city's ability to attract high-level competent attorneys. And you know, the outside attorneys we have are high-level competent attorneys, or we wouldn't have them. The third point I would make is that on December the 13th, 2012, I sent a memo out on attorney's fees to Ashton Hayward, Bill Reynolds, John Asmar, City Council, Lila Cox, Derek Cosson, and Dick Barker, with a review of attorney's fees, how they were paid, and how they were reviewed. And without going into the whole document again, part of the document said that, to my knowledge, and that knowledge continues as of this date, I have no personal knowledge as the city attorney of any unreasonable fee being charged or any work being done that wasn't directly related to the successful accomplishment of city business. Again, I'm not going to go through that memo. It's available if you'd like to see it. So again, I think those are all just factual considerations that you should know about. Thank you.
Okay, I have Councilmember Myers and Councilmember Bear. Please be brief. Councilmember Myers, she had her hands up. Councilmember Spencer, you have not spoken on the issue.
No, I haven't.
You have. Okay.
I have, yes, I'd like to speak.
Okay.
Sorry. Thanks. I am not going to support overriding this veto tonight, and I came into this discussion with an open mind. I will say that what was shared with us by who was then just our chief financial officer at the time, but now our interim city administrator, as well as Mr. Wells, has very much convinced me not to support overriding the veto. And I also want to ask Madam President, Mr. Wells, one question.
Please.
But, you know, I heard fellow council member Wu discuss certainly why he may be supporting, and I'm not casting his vote, but overriding the veto. But I also want to ask you, since that council member was on in November of 2004, what has changed, what was happening in November of 2004 and up to the present regarding this sort of the process of engaging attorneys? Has anything changed?
Not to my knowledge. I think that listening to Dr. Wu's comments and reviewing what I might have said that created his concern. When I said when I was city attorney, I would send a file, or the risk management office would send a file to the firm that we've talked about, the local firm that does automobile defense work. It wasn't with the idea of charge whatever you want, I don't care. We know what you charge. We know you're the cheapest in town. We know what your rates are, what your paralegals charge, we know what the costs are going to be of the defense. It wasn't, and it was it's down the line, it's as Mr. Barker said, we really do that with established firms that have used for that field of expertise for many, many years. And no, if we're going to engage someone for a specific purpose, a specific project, defending, a high profile or a protracted litigation, yes, we'd always have a written contract. If we'd not dealt with them before, we'd always have a clarification, understanding of the rates and charges of that firm. So no, it was never a blank check. It's never an open-ended thing. But to the extent that the practices of the office, how that question is in part, I assume, directed to Mr. Messer, who's been here for the last 3 years. And but I mean, certainly, as I said, I've had a contract with every hat that I've worn representing the city. So for the most part, there are contracts, but they're not. My point was, they're not centrally located. They're in the electronic bosom of Fortis.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Tahar.
And this is just for me to sort of get a wrap around what you're saying, is that when you send a file to an attorney that you know what they're going to charge per hour and all that stuff, but you're saying we can't ask them, okay, well, how many hours are you going to spend on this, because they don't really know. Is that correct?
Yeah. Let me give an example. The area of employment litigation, for instance, one of my used to be fields of expertise. The first thing you get, it comes in steps, is you get the administrative complaint. It has to be responded to the administrative agency, Department of Justice, Department of Labor, EEOC, whoever it's coming from. And you want counsel to be involved at the very beginning, because you want your defense and the facts to be gathered up front. And so you have no idea where that complaint is going to go. Are they going to file a lawsuit? Once they file a lawsuit, are they going to allege it as a class action? If it's that makes a difference on the cost. And so litigation evolves, and you just can't know on day one how many hours are going to be devoted to this case, or what the total cost is going to be at the end of the line. All you can do is get the best representation at the most favorable price, and that's the approach the city's taking.
And just one more quick question. So essentially, at the end of the trial, regardless of the outcome, you get a bill, and the bill says it's this amount of money, and it breaks it down, tells you how many hours they spent on all that stuff.
Most of the ongoing, like the litigation I just described, we would want them to bill periodically, monthly, quarterly.
But at the end, you could total that up and know how much that costs.
Yes, you can see where it's headed as it progresses.
And then just as the interim city administrator, but also the CFO, Mr. Barker, if I were to, as the administrator, send you an email and say, hey, can you send me, the cost for the litigation to someone sued the mayor, and I want to know how much that cost, is that hard to get to me if I ask for that?
No, sir, it's not. As a matter of fact, you'll see today we've broken it down in my report by the firm. So if that attorney handled several cases for the city, we could break it down by case. The description I have here is by vendor.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So everyone's spoken. Okay, let's go to Councilmember Myers, Councilmember Bear, and then Dr. Pratt. And please be brief, get to the point so that we can.
Well, let's follow the council rules, okay?
Well, you have 3 minutes.
All right. I want to address Mr. Barker's assertion about staff input. I think that Mr. Barker knows about the mayor's memo directing basically staff not to have communications with council members. So if I want to work on an ordinance idea, there's nobody I can talk to and call and say, hey, I want to work on this, will you work on, give me your input, so forth. That's not going to happen. Now, I think that staff, and Mr. Barker in particular, had plenty of time to have input into these ordinances. First, when this was put on the agenda conference, there was a week between the time the agenda was published and we had an agenda conference. There's a week right there. You could have called me. From the time of the agenda conference to the city council meeting, there's another 3 days there. Somebody could have called me. Then the council voted on the ordinance. We passed it. It didn't come back up before council, I don't think, for another month. You could have called me. There was plenty of time, if staff wanted to have input into this, for you to have input. So I don't buy the argument that this was just plopped here on council without staff having an opportunity to have input. You had more than ample time to have input, to get on the phone and call me and say, hey, this isn't going to work, or maybe this will work better. So I don't buy that you didn't have an opportunity to have input. You did. Now, there is more transparency in medical billing than there is in this. In 2011, I asked through open records for contracts for attorneys. In fact, I didn't even get Mr. Wells' contract until he started working for council. And yet he had a contract in 2011 that I saw 3.5 years later. And when I asked Mr. Barker for contracts, you told me you didn't have any contracts. And you were going to charge me $500 to look at invoices. This is in 2011. So that's what I've had to go through to get information regarding attorney fees. I think the public has the right to know what we're spending millions of dollars for. All this does is conform to the practice in the state of Florida. If in the state of Florida you can't go out and get outside legal contracts without getting it approved by the state attorney's office. And why should everybody go out and be able to get
Excuse me. Please just, your time, but just please wrap it up for me, Ms. Myers.
what is he calling, point of order?
Well, the 3 minutes is up, but I want to give you time to sum that up.
Basically, all this ordinance does is require tracking and accountability of where these contracts are and what we're spending money for. It's just that simple.
Thank you. Councilmember Baird.
Thank you, Madam President. I think when Ms. Castile was still here and we had this debate, she was aware of it, and I think her exact comment was, you're saying that you don't trust her and Mr. Messer. I think by doing this, by passing these ordinances, that's what we're saying. That's not what we're saying. This is a communication issue. It's more than transparency. What we have is a dysfunctional system, okay? Mr. Barker says we need to use staff, but they're executive staff with the legislative branch. The Florida legislature does not use the governor's staff to get things accomplished. So by virtue of our system, we have to use a staff that doesn't actually work for us. They were aware of it, they knew about it, and afterwards, I understand Mr. Barker did give his recommendation to veto it. I understand that. I understand that he has a willingness to provide information. What this does is it requires it. We have to have communication. We have to be able to know who's working for the city. In the memo that Mr. Wells sent with detailing the attorneys that are working for us, that was on the 22nd of August. I believe the subpoena that was issued for the attorney that issued the subpoena, the assistant U.S. attorney, is from the criminal division. Just in case anyone was wondering that, it's not the civil division, not any other. It's the criminal division. It doesn't say anywhere that Beggs and Lang does any kind of criminal work for the city, but apparently they might be doing that. Yesterday at 10:15, I talked to Tamara Fountain, our chief operating officer, and she told me that as soon as they had information that they were going to release to the press, that it would be released to the council as well. Well, that didn't happen. It was in the press. This is communication. This is why we have to do things like this. It's because we need more than a policy, more than a simple understanding, a handshake between ourselves and the administration. We need ordinances that people can see, that we are maintaining these records and have them available for people to see. What Mr. Messer said, that's just not good enough. These are citizen dollars that we are spending. It's not our own personal checkbook that we're spending. So when we can't say what an attorney's doing, I mean, that's just not enough. All we're asking for in here is the nature of the business, the reasons that we need it, and that our city attorney can't do it, and then the estimated number of hours. We're not asking for the exact number of hours, but we do know what they're doing for us. I can't imagine that the citizens would be happy with us just going and hiring attorneys and say, just do whatever you need to do to get this problem taken care of. I don't think we should do that. And all I think this does is codifies our concern and our need for public information and the administration's responsibility to do it. I don't think it adds a huge burden. Even our attorneys said it's not a huge paper burden. And I don't know if he and the acting administrator agree on that, but they were both listed as people who recommended these be vetoed. And all I'm asking is that you understand that we're not asking for something that they say they can't provide. You know, maybe some of the little nitty-gritty details, which we're not really asking for, they won't do. But this is something that we need to do our jobs as council people. We need this information, and we need it in a way that tomorrow they can't just change their mind and not do it anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I know this is not going to get overridden, but I think that it is important for us to deal with some of this. You know, I have some personal experience with contracts with attorneys to advise the city, and when the city attorney directed me during a CRA meeting to work with that attorney to help us with stuff, I did. This was after this person had already worked for the city, had been paid through the city payment system, that his payments had been approved, and after I worked with him and he had recommendations that were contrary to the administration's opinion, it was alleged that I or the city staff person who worked with me on this might be liable for those charges. And that highlights the possible messed up system we have regarding contracts with attorneys and how they're paid and the oversight of that. I've waffled tonight, as I waffled that first night. I don't think these ordinances are necessarily the way to go, but I do hope that this council finds a way to figure out something that we all feel comfortable with, and that we can go out to the citizens and say, it's okay, it's working, there's a good system. Because I can't do that at this point. I think there's some major flaws. I don't know that this would solve it, but we have some major issues that are, I don't think any of us can go out and say that this system is working in a great way without addressing these issues. Thanks.
Thank you. I have not spoken on the issue here, and I will not be supporting the override. I think that if this does not address some of the issues that we have in reference to accounting, in reference to other issues. However, I do feel that at this point we have an individual that is the interim city administrator and our finance director, who is willing to provide the assistance that we need to answer the questions and the concerns. I've made notes here so that, no, this issue will not go away. We need to develop a plan and a policy, a procedure in reference to this. I think that we can. Now, in reference to another thing here about council unable to talk to get information and ordinances through. I think that if you started tomorrow with an issue, an initiative, and you contact Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells is not only the city attorney, he is also the liaison person between the city council and staff. You will find that you will be able to get the assistance that you need to make sure that things get staffed, that things are, they don't have to agree with us. We're not asking for permission, but whatever the cost, whatever the impact of any of our initiatives and things are, we would know them up front. We would know them up front. I think that you will find that possible now where you could not find that possible 6 months ago or maybe 2 years ago when some of the council members came on in the transition of government 4 years ago. So I think that you will find that possible now. Thank you. And I ask that you please vote.
Okay.
Dr.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President.
Okay.
Two questions, and again, I know how the vote's going to end up going. As I looked at the sheet that was provided us on the summary of charges, I believe the amount was close to $5 million. Is that correct?
Madam President, may I answer?
Yes.
Councilman Wu, to date, October 1st through June 30th, the amount is $847,872.58. Now, the issue where you may be coming up with the $5 million, I don't remember exactly. I received a request, and the request was in the nature of how much have you paid to legal firms. One of the legal firms does a lot of the work with the airport, and they receive all the money when we close on a piece of property that pays the individual also. So that was in that total. What I understand council in the ordinance wanted was the fees, not other costs that we would give them, other costs that relates to the purchase of land and that type of things.
Right.
So now that we have that understanding of what council wants, those have been broken out. So
Well, from what I'm looking at right here, is $4,300,000, and then taking out what you said was amount paid to a law firm for airport land requisitions, which was $1.6 million.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that total, though, was $4.2 million. So we're not talking about a small amount of money overall.
I don't know where you're coming up with those figures exactly, but
Right.
like I say, this year to date for fees, we've paid $147,000.
Right.
I mean, $847,000.
What I'm looking at here.
Madam President?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Mr. Messer?
Can I finish? I want to ask Mr. Messer, who I consider a good friend, a question, and please do not consider this a sticky lollipop. A minute ago, you mentioned that there was a review that was given out that looked at the summary of all the attorneys and what they had paid and what they had charged and what they had done. Was that shared with the council?
Yes, sir, I've got a copy here. I'll be glad to...
No, I mean at the time when it was
Well,
distributed.
it was from me, and one of the addressees was City Council. The other addressee was Lila Cox. So,
So the
I mean,
answer
I'm
is
not
yes.
saying
So
we
the
got
answer-
it, I'm saying I sent it.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Dr. Wu.
And just out of an abundance of caution, I'll stick my neck out. Without looking at the numbers, I will personally guarantee this council that we have not spent $4.2 million on attorney's fees, because if we had, I would be one of the outside counsel. It would simply be too lucrative. Now, I think where we're sort of getting off the track on that narrow issue of millions of dollars, and I want to mildly correct what Mr. Barker said, just to make sure everyone's clear. When the city purchases real estate, we deposit the full purchase price with the law firm. Now, the law firm that we do the largest amount of business with in that regard is the Clark Partington law firm, and in truth, there have been millions of dollars transmitted to that law firm, but those monies have been used for the most part for the purchase of, I think, probably hundreds of parcels of property for the airport. But that money does not go into the pockets of the attorneys. They have a fiduciary responsibility to the city to hold that money, because the buyer needs to know that the money's available, because we have banks and lenders involved. So don't misunderstand the seven-figure numbers and the six-figure numbers.
Thank you. I have one council member, Councilmember Spencer, who would like to speak, and I also have a member in the audience, Mr. Taylor, who would like to speak. Councilmember.
Thank you, Madam President, and I believe this is my second time doing this. Okay, thank you. I want to offer what I hope will be a useful byproduct of tonight's discussion. I think the theme that I have heard surface is communication, and I think fellow council representative Pratt did an excellent job in really expressing some of her frustration and leaving us with I think, the responsibility to improve that communication. So I offer the following example. We have a model currently in place in which we have several different departments represented every Wednesday morning, I believe that's 9 a.m., and it allows for a roundtable discussion where anyone involved in typically development projects, they have the opportunity to sit down with planning department, they sit down with engineering, inspections, they can invite the fire marshal. In other words, our citizens have an opportunity to meet with some of the top decision makers or experienced department heads in which there is a very constructive conversation that occurs as a citizen is asking for guidance and assistance. And I am suggesting that we might be able to set up a similar model, in fact, in which we as council members have the opportunity to meet with on a regularly scheduled weekly basis, that there is a time that I will call it, just to put it in context of tonight, sort of ordinance construction workshop, but where the council member has the opportunity to meet with various members of our staff. But I think it would help them if they knew there was a designated time. We can't forget that they have the tall responsibility to perform efficiently. They have so many tasks that go on that we don't see. They deserve to have some order to their schedule and not just be expected to drop everything if a council member has somehow asked for help through Rusty Wells. So I'm just suggesting that could be the beginning of a tradition and a methodology that could help us construct ordinances that always has staff input from the very beginning.
Thank you. Mr. Till.
Thank you, Council President and City Council members. I'm Mark Taylor, 1110 East Belmont Street, City of Pensacola, District 6 resident. And I'm so disappointed because a couple of months ago it was a unanimous vote, on this dais that supported moving forward on this. And to be honest with you, I came here tonight just thinking it was going to be no big deal. It was going to be a lay-down vote, going to override the veto, and I do encourage each of you to override the veto. I got lost listening to Mr. Wells and Mr. Messer, and first Mr. Wells said there was contracts and there's documents for everything, and then Mr. Messer said no, sometimes there's not, and then Mr. wells said, well, most of the time there is, and so what is it, and what's the deal? Whether it's $4.2 million that Dr. Wu says, or $2.7 when you take the acquisition money from the airport out, or if it's $1 million, it's city taxpayers' money. We have city residents and businesses that are out of their homes and offices right now because of faulty stormwater, and they're sitting out living in a hotel or living racked up with friends. That's a lot of money. Mr. Wells made mention of a doctor. He comes, from a different thing. I don't ever go to a doctor. I've paid two babies cash, Luke and Andrew both, and negotiated with Baptist Hospital 3 months before they were born to know how much I needed to pay and have saved up, ready to have a baby at term. So asking those questions are huge. I've been fortunate that I've had very little experience with attorneys, but the few that I've had, they've said, Mark, I'm going to charge you $250 an hour, $300 an hour, $320 an hour, and I estimate that it's going to take 20 hours to get what you want done. This would be a range of what that total cost would be. Of course, there's variables. But guys, this is smart business. Y'all are intelligent individuals. Many of you are small business owners, as am I. And none of us would move into something like this without a written contract and an understanding of about what the time frame is going to be. So I really encourage you to override this veto, move forward, be transparent to the taxpayers. You're our fiduciaries. You're our trustees of the tax dollars that we pay into this city. And I really hope that you will override this veto. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other comments, could you please vote? The override of the veto fails.